Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of this top 10, United States Champ. The reason for this top 10? Well, it's going to be released on July 4th of 2023, celebrating America, the United States, our independence from England. So I figured what better way to celebrate our independence than to talk about the top 10 US champions. Now, the criteria for this is going to be number of reigns, total days the championship was held, and overall impact on their career and the sport. With that being said, let's give you a little bit of a lineage of the championship before we do go into this. From 1975 to 1981, this was called the NWA U.S. Heavyweight Championship, and it was recognized by Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, or Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, which would be the precursor to Jim Crockett Promotions, or what Jim Crockett Promotions was known as. Then from 1981 to 1991, it just became the NWA United States Heavyweight Championship, which was recognized through the entire governing body of the NWA, not just in Mid-Atlantic. From 1991 to 2001, it became the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship. It was shortened in 2001 to just the WCW US Championship. Then after WCW closes down, 2 years later, it is brought back from 2003 till the time of this recording, and probably several years further, it is the WWE United States Championship. With that being said, let's jump right into the list. We could have people from every one of those eras, some of them in multiple eras, so let's give you our opinions. Starting off at number 10, Rusev. Rusev had 3 United States Championship runs totaling 312 days, and while he wasn't the first foreign wrestler to carry the championship, he was one of the ones that kind of brought it back to that anti-America kind of thing, where he used it in a way to prove that Bulgarians or Russians, whatever they decided to call him that week on WWE, were more superior than people from America, and proving so by winning the United States Championship. I think the 3 reigns and the overall impact on Rusev's career cannot be overstated. In a time where they were trying to build new heels, build new credible wrestlers, they absolutely had a guy with Rusev here. I do think WWE didn't capitalize him on as much as they should have, but he still had some pretty good runs here. Now going from Rusev, our number 9, Bobby Lashley. Bobby Lashley had 3 runs with the US Championship, totaling 324 days, both in his first run with WWE and now his comeback to WWE. Initially, this was used as a championship as a springboard to put Bobby Lashley into the main events and build his credibility. However, when he came back, he was used to build the credibility of the championship. It's kind of cool seeing that arc of Bobby Lashley, how he went from the guy that the belt helped to him helping the belt itself. One of the underrated wrestlers of the last 20 years, just a great wrestler altogether. I really enjoyed all his runs. I thought he was a great US champion, hence why he's on the list. Now going from that, our number 8. We talked about Rusev being one of the foreign heels to carry the championship. In my opinion, the guy that best ran with that template, Nikita Koloff. Nikita Koloff had one championship run that lasted 328 days, almost a full year. And if you go back to that era of Jim Crockett Promotions, and you talk about the great feuds and the great matches and the great champions of the time, one of the first things that comes off is Nikita Koloff and Magnum TA. And it wasn't just great on the Magnum TA side, it was great on the Nikita Koloff side as well. He was so credible, so great. For a guy that may or may not have been a little bit limited in the ring, he was able to make you believe. You believed that he was a foreign menace, and then when he eventually turned face, you believed that he had a change of heart, that seeing what happened with Magnum TA really made him change his mind on Americans. This was such a great and iconic run. For people that grew up in that era, they remember this so fondly. I love watching Nikita Koloff's old stuff, especially to this day. He was a guy that really captivated me when I was a youngster. I mean, who didn't love the Russian sickle? I could tell you, me and my friends, we would run around doing the Russian sickle and clothesline each other. I know it's all wrestling fans go through a phase where they do some backyard wrestling. The term wasn't even created yet when we were doing it. We would just goof around in our yards or in our bedrooms. We'd put a bed on the floor, and that would be the mat, or put 2 beds next to each other and day would be the mat and you'd wrestle around, or sometimes there'd be no mat whatsoever. So yeah, everybody would do the Russian sickle because it was easy, but it looked impressive, and if you've ever been clotheslined in real life, you know it hurts. Just a fantastic wrestler, hence why he's on our list. Now going from that, our number 7, John Cena. Cena held the championship 5 separate occasions for a total of 405 days. And again, much like Bobby Lashley, at different times in his career, the US Championship was used to build him, and at other times he was used to build the championship. His open challenge is something that is off and on a thing that they do with the championship now. I mean, it gave us such great moments as Sami Zayn's debut, Kevin Owens' debut, him building up in the beginning where he first used the US Championship as the original spinner belt, which I think looked better than the WWE Championship as a spinner, in my opinion. I mean, what can I really say about John Cena that you haven't heard 1,000 times? I do like the fact that a lot of the world has come around, and the wrestling world has come around to where they respect and really admire John Cena's contributions, as opposed to before where he was kind of looked at as Super Cena and everybody disliked him. I do like that we've come around to it. I think he's fantastic. That's why he's on my list. I'll go from that, our number 6. Going all the way back to the Mid-Atlantic title days, Blackjack Mulligan. Mulligan had 3 title reigns lasting 509 days, and it could be argued that this is the highlight of his Hall of Fame career. He was one of the guys that really started the legacy of the championship and made it something that was a belt that was highly sought after, that basically was almost on par with the NWA World Championship at the time, and really gave it a real meaning and a real sense of importance. One of those guys that I don't think his contributions to wrestling are as heralded as they should be. Absolute legend in every sense of the word. I think some of the things that are a shame is the fact that you don't get to see much of his run or much of when he was in his prime, because it was in the era of the 70s where there isn't a lot of recordings left of it. Wrestling fans today are kind of spoiled. Even some of the smallest indies in the world have an extensive back catalog of their matches on videotape or on YouTube or DVDs that you could go and watch. I mean, you could find stuff now from almost any indie promotion in the United States or all across the world. You can watch a guy's whole career. Unfortunately, with Blackjack Mulligan, we don't get a lot of what his career was. I did get to see the tail end of it as it was happening, and I have seen a lot of the older tapes. Again, I'm someone that probably would look that out, and chances are you may be too because you're watching this video. I think he's one of those guys that's underrated in history, but definitely had a lasting effect on both the championship and a lot of the wrestling fans. Going from Blackjack Mulligan, our number 5, a guy we talked about a little bit earlier, Magnum TA. Magnum had 2 championship reigns totaling 302 days. Much like I said with Nikita Koloff, you can't say Koloff without seeing Magnum TA. You can't say Magnum without seeing Koloff. These two are intertwined like Austin and McMahon, Foley and The Undertaker, the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express, the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. Just one of the great feuds of all time, and Magnum's one of those great what ifs in wrestling history. What if he never had that car crash? What if he would have been able to win the world championship? How different would the wrestling landscape be? What would have changed? Would Jim Crockett have grown to the level of WWE? They were close. People tend to forget that it wasn't the WWE running away with it. Yes, they were probably number 1 as far as nationwide, but in the South and even in areas like Philadelphia and Baltimore, the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions had a stronghold as well. They were on TNT television, which at the time was a huge deal. And if you don't think it is, look at the difference now even with how AEW's perceived being on TNT versus Impact Wrestling on a lesser channel. Magnum was one of the huge stars, and that moment probably definitely changed the course of wrestling history. Would they have been able to capitalize? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe they just go the same route. Maybe it only buys them an extra year. Who knows? But Magnum TA, I can't think of the 80s and think of the United States Championship without thinking of Magnum. That's why he's up here on our list. Now going from that, our number 4, Montel Vontavious Porter, aka MVP. MVP had 2 runs with the championship totaling 419 days, and much like I said with Koloff and Magnum defining their era, I think MVP is one of those defining wrestlers of that era of wrestling, of the late 2000s or what's considered the era after that 2002 influx that gave us Cena, Batista, Orton, and Lesnar, we get that next crop of guys like MVP and Carlito and people like Kofi Kingston, Sheamus. They would be that next crop of guys coming in. And to me, I always thought MVP was going to be a world champion. I thought he had everything he would need. He had the charisma, he had the ring talent, he could talk, he had a fantastic backstory, going from someone who had spent a number of years in jail to reclaiming his life and becoming a positive role model. I definitely think he should have had at least one run with the main world championship. But even though he didn't, his run with the United States Championship, to me, again, like the other guys I mentioned here, helped to define the era that he carried it. I really enjoy MVP. Sadly, he's probably on my list of one of the top 10 guys that should have won a championship but didn't. But he definitely deserves to be on this list because he's one of the great U.S. champions of all time, in my opinion. Now, going from MVP to our number 3, a man that a lot of people consider the greatest of all time, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Now, depending on what record book you go with, Flair either had 5 championship reigns or 6 championship reigns. I tend to go with the 6, which totals out to 773 days. And the reason why someone like Flair isn't automatically number 1 here or higher than number 3, I know that it helped his career, and I know he helped the championship, especially when he carried it during the WCW run. The credibility of Ric Flair having that championship really meant something. But let's be honest, when you think of Ric Flair, do you think a United States champion? I don't. It's probably one of the 4th or 5th things that come to my mind. The first thing that comes to mind is the big gold belt. Second thing is the 4 horsemen. Third thing is his promos. And then maybe you think of the United States championship. And like I said, I know the impact it had. I know how it helped his career. I know how he helped the belt. But to me, it just means more him being other places on the card. That's why he's very high on this list. I mean, obviously, he's Ric Flair, but he's not quite number 1. Now, going from Ric Flair, our number 2, one of his contemporaries and a guy that he's considered a longtime friend, Greg the Hammer Valentine. Now, you may have noticed that Ric Flair had basically 2 years with the championship. Valentine didn't have quite as long. However, I think his impact with it was stronger than Flair's. Valentine had 2 runs, totaling 512 days, and this was back more in the Blackjack Mulligan era of the championship when it was the NWA Mid-Atlantic version. Valentine, much like Mulligan, but a little bit on a lesser scale because we've seen a lot of the WWF 80s footage of Valentine goes out there, and a lot of people remember his Intercontinental runs or his Tag Team Championship runs. But when you go back and you look at these runs that he had with the championship and his legendary battles with Wahoo McDaniel, you kind of realize just how important Greg the Hammer Valentine was. I absolutely love Valentine. I love going back and watching his work, which is kind of funny because as a kid he was boring to me. But back then, I didn't get the nuance of it. I get that now, and it makes more sense. And I'm more apt to enjoy a match from Greg Valentine than other people of his generation who I thought were exciting back then, who now are very boring now to me. I love Valentine. I think he definitely deserves a recognition. He probably should be brought up a lot more in the list of all-time greats, but that's just my opinion of it. Now, before we get into our number 1, I do a thing here on my videos called the best of the rest, basically things that were considered for the list but didn't quite make it. First up, the ravishing one, Rick Rude. Rude had 1 title reign, totaling 378 days, and to me, much like I've talked about with different people, Mulligan and Valentine in their era, Koloff and Magnum in their era, Cena and MVP in that era, Rude really defined that early 90s era of WCW and the U.S. Championship in that run. I mean, when you think of the great matches he had with Dustin Rhodes, Steve Austin, Ricky Steamboat back then, it was just a fantastic championship reign. And you have here one of the guys that's considered one of the greats of all time, holding the championship and really adding to that credibility. I love Rude. He was considered, but didn't quite make my top 10. Now, last but not least on the best of the rest, Sheamus. At this time, Sheamus has held the U.S. Championship 3 different times for 362 days. It may end up being more, and some of the other people that are still active, like Cena, could potentially win it again. Rusev could potentially win it again if he goes back to WWE. Lashley, Even MVP might get another run. Sheamus is probably, out of all the people I just mentioned, the most likely to get another run with it, and maybe if we do this video again in 5 years, 10 years, he might actually make it onto the list. Much like some of the other people on this list, like Valentine, MVP, Sheamus is a little bit underrated for his time frame. I mean, if you really think about it, how many people have had the run that Sheamus has had in the WWE for the length of time that he has? I mean, you could count 10 people other than him. I mean, you could go Cena, Orton, Hogan. I mean, who has been on top or as close to the top for as long as Sheamus has? Unfortunately, I do think that just those qualifications don't necessarily make him one of the greats on the list. I do think there were 10 people that were better. I do think that Sheamus definitely deserved consideration. Now, before I get to my number one, let's smash that like button. Share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, that's how you become a channel member. It definitely helps out if you'd like to do that. With all that being said, our number one United States champion, the total package, Lex Luger. Luger had 5 championship reigns, going over 950 days, which is basically 2.5 years total. And the reason why I think Luger was the greatest U.S. champion of all time, much like I said with Bobby Lashley and John Cena, early in his career, the United States Championship was used to make Luger look better, while later in his career, Luger was used to make the U.S. Championship look better, and I definitely associate him the most with that championship, whether it be because he's the one that I've seen wear it more than anyone else, or the quality of his runs, which they all were really great. People like to talk about Lex Luger being a bad wrestler, but he really wasn't. He was very entertaining. He may not have been technically on the level of a Ricky Steamboat or a Ric Flair, but there were a few wrestlers of his era that were. Lex was believable. Lex was a great character. He was a great personality. Again, like I said, he may not have been the best in the ring, but he could tell really good stories in ring. I mean, when you gave him a great opponent, like Flair or Sting or Dusty Rhodes or any of the number of other great matches he's had through his career, he would put on fantastic matches. When I close my eyes and I think of the U.S. Championship, I see it around the waist of Lex Luger, and that's why I think he's the guy that has had the biggest impact with it. I think he definitely is the number one U.S. champion in my opinion, and just a great wrestler altogether. I think he doesn't get the respect he quite deserves. With all that being said, if you made it all the way to the end, let me know you made it to the end. Let me know who your favorite United States champion is. It doesn't have to be someone that had it a long time. They could have it one day if you want. Let me know who your favorite was. Put it down here in the comments. And with all that being said, my name is George Coles. This has been another Top 10.